For today's critical thought, we're going to be discussing some of the basic elements for action-based design, and why no matter what kind of genre or audience you're aiming for, this is the bare essentials you need to do right, or unfortunately your game is just not going to work well. Action-based gameplay may be one of the oldest core gameplay loops of titles or the foundation for game design, but it can often slip up a lot of developers, especially if they are either first-timers in the genre or they're trying to combine it with a more abstracted or different kind of design. So this could be, I'm going to build an RPG, but the core gameplay could be platforming. Or, one of our more popular examples, the Souls-like genre, and trying to get that feel working right for action RPG design. But what I've learned and what I've come to expect whenever I play action games is that there is a core tenet you need to follow when you're trying to build a control scheme and just general moment to moment of an action based game. And that has to do with this idea of a 1-to-1 ratio of button input to action. So what that means is when I press a button or if I do some on my gamepad, that should be the only action that that character takes. And I know as I say this that it sounds very simple, but this is often where a lot of developers mess up with their designs. In that I hit a button and my character either has a delay of that action, or let's say there's such a long animation after I hit that button that my inputs aren't registering. A common issue I see from first-time platformer designers, especially the 2D variety, is that when you are moving your character, or when you're jumping, the character retains the momentum even if you let go of whatever direction you're holding. So it's kind of like you jump, and then the character is still moving even though you're not pressing it. And this requires essentially you to jump and then recalibrate the character in the air in order to just make a simple landing. This is not something that we see in very precise platformers or even just some of the better examples. The footage you're seeing up there is of course from Super Meat Boy. And Super Meat Boy is a very hard, very not so much like technical, but still very demanding platforming experience. But it's one that doesn't feel as hard as you would think, even though I'm going to probably be dying like for the next 5 minutes of that footage because we're playing on, I think that's the Dark World. But when I play Super Meat Boy, what I enjoyed out of it is that how I manipulate Meat Boy is exactly how my hands feel on the gamepad. So that no matter how I'm pushing the buttons in, no matter how much I'm holding down jump or whatever, I just hit my monitor there, he is responding exactly how I press it. Here's another very subtle issue that I see some developers do. That I press the A button and I let go, and my character is still going up, or the momentum is still being carried. It doesn't sound that bad when I say it, but for anyone who's played a platformer, you know how annoying it is when you let go of the jump button, your character is still in the air jumping, and they hit an obstacle. Or you lose control. And that's ultimately what you want to avoid in any action-based design. That the player feels like they are not in complete control over their character. And this can be taken to a very extreme, or to an extreme, if there's so many commands being lumped or being put onto different buttons. We did an earlier critical thought, and this was like a few years ago, about primary and secondary actions. A primary action needs its own button input because it's something the player is going to be doing predominantly. So jumping would be an example. And you have to be careful when you combine functionalities onto the same button. Who here has ever played a game where instead of pressing the button to interact with a switch or push a button, your character jumps? Or he just, swings his fists randomly. For instance, I was recently playing Death Stranding, and one of my favorite things is that they assign the I'm going to go over and talk to an NPC button to the I'm going to punch them in the face button. So guess what happens when you try and interact with a character and you're just slightly off from where that hitbox is supposed to be? Instead of saying thank you for giving me an item, I punch the guy in the face. Or here's another popular example of why you have to be really careful with these kinds of control schemes. Who here has ever played an open world game when you're trying to do something that's very fine movement, unless you just want to walk very close to an edge, and instead your character dives and cartwheels, 20 feet off that edge and kills themselves? And this is the issue you have to concern yourself when it comes to control schemes and just the general functionality and action-based design. That if the player ever feels like they are not in control over their character, it's going to kill any sense of enjoyment or the moment-to-moment gameplay. And oftentimes, when we play action games that we really enjoy, it gets that feeling right. That the character only moves when I tell them to, and every action feels very responsive, even if you buffer commands. And we're going to talk about that next after this quick break, and how even with a series such as the Souls-likes, you can still make that action feel snappy to the player. And now for a quick thank you to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. Now available at most retailers are my current books on design. 20 Essential Games to Study is an intro-level look at 20 unique games to provide inspiration for any developer looking to get into the game industry. And the Game Design Deep Dive series each go into a top-to-bottom look at the design of a specific genre, with platformers and roguelikes now available, and horror coming in the near future. In the last part, we spoke about how what the player is doing should relate almost one-to-one or always one-to-one to what the character is responding to on screen. And one thing that I'm sure people are going to respond to is, what about Souls-likes? What about games that are very methodical with their design or with their general motion? Because one-to-one works really well in high-speed games, Doom, Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, and so on. But what about a game like this? And for those of you who haven't played a Souls-like, a key aspect of it is that everything is tied to the animation of your character and the enemy. So you can't necessarily interrupt your own animations. As in, if I'm swinging my weapon, I can immediately cancel out of that and dodge if I need to. Many 2D action titles, and sometimes like isometric ones, will let you do that if they want the game to feel very snappy. Hades is a really good example of that. But with Bloodborne here, and with just about any other Souls-like, most of your animations are committed. So once I start swinging my sword or using my gun, I can't exit out of that. And the reason why that works is that we're still dealing with a more methodic pace. There are lesser examples of Souls-likes where character animations are so long or so unwieldy that the enemy moves out of the way before you can even finish it. Or if there's no real response when I swing my weapon, that I'll hit an enemy, but nothing really happens to it. And Bloodborne, as you're watching this footage here, this is, I guess, quote-unquote, faster, or a faster pace than some of the other Souls-likes we've seen. Now, another key aspect you want to have with action-based design, you want your control scheme to almost not be a factor. And what I mean by that is that it should be so easy to control your character that you're not thinking about the gamepad or the keyboard and mouse. This is where we get to that idea of the state of flow when it comes to a strenuous task. Doom Eternal work really well in this regard, and so do some of the better Souls-likes. With Bloodborne, when I'm in combat, I don't need to focus too much on my entire gamepad, namely attack, move, dodge, and of course setting up a repose. And again, healing set to your hotkeys or your hot menu up there. And this is a very big point about good action-based design. That you want your gamepad or your game control scheme to be as intuitive as possible for your game. Many RPG and strategy-based designs will frequently use as many of the buttons on there as possible to give the player full and complete control. For action games, a lot of the player's focus is going to be on the moment-to-moment gameplay, and you need that to feel right in their hands. Part of the issue that I have with a lot of open world style games is that they focus so much on the macro controls, as in, grand movements, driving, super jumping, triple jumping, whatever, that they forget that just the basic act of motion should be responsive. This is often kind of like the secret sauce that I see from Nintendo's best games, the Mario series and so on, that controlling Mario just by walking or running and jumping is responsive and enjoyable to play. It doesn't feel like Mario does something that I didn't expect him to do. And when you're playing, whether in 2D or 3D design, it still applies. I've played 2D games where I'll try and attack or I'll try to move around and the character has a delay or it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel as snappy as it should. Again, when I press a button on my gamepad, the character should react. It shouldn't take like a 3 to 4 second wind-up period for that character to move. In the older examples of platforming design, there were plenty of adventure-style platformers. Out of This World, Flashback, Prince of Persia, Blackthorn, and I think several other ones, that when you try to push a button, the character doesn't immediately respond. He needs to have like a get up and go feel to it. And you want to avoid that in action-based games or action design today. Even titles today that are built more on on puzzling or adventure in a 2D space will still make the character feel good to control. And this is kind of the heart of our lesson for today's video. That it doesn't matter what kind of the subgenre you're aiming for, puzzle, RPG, adventure, stealth, whatever. If you are building your game around action layer or action core gameplay loop, that needs to feel good to play. Because if that's bad, that is the foundation of your title. And it's going to affect everything else. And I've played lots of kind of, adventure platforming or more puzzle platforming titles where the character doesn't feel good to control, and it just saps my enjoyment of this game. Again, even with franchises like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and so on, that you're still dealing with kind of the inertia or heft of your animations, you can still make that feel right in the player's hands. And there's a lot of little tricks you can do that, such as speeding up animations, deciding whether or not to allow the player to cancel out of animations. Again, usually a dash or dodge cancel is considered popular. And you just want the character to feel good. Here's another mistake I see developers make. That in kind of beat 'em up or combat focused games, they'll create a combo that, let's say the third or final hit is an extra long animation that completely, takes up everything the player is trying to do. The problem is that if the enemies are faster than you, that attack is a detriment because you're going to try and do it and the enemy will just interrupt or just get out of the way of it. And you have to be mindful of this. Action-based design is very technical in terms of the feel of it. And if it's off, it ruins everything. Again, poor UI design is often the underrated killer of a game. Whether we're talking about an action game or just the simple act of menuing, or how it looks on screen if you're trying to play an RPG or strategy game. But again, that would take us way off topic for tonight. So here's my question for you watching this. Besides the big examples, Devil May Cry, Souls-likes, Mario, etc., can you think of franchises that nailed the feel of movement and control really well? And can you think of examples that did not? And if you can you explain why it didn't feel right to control? But with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future piece, please get in touch. As always, check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.